Hello, Burnsville High School. We are going to talk today about the end of World War I, which happened with the Treaty of Versailles. They signed the Treaty of Versailles in Paris, France. Well, near Paris, I should say, actually in Versailles. And this is the palace. This picture is where they actually signed the treaty. So let's get started. Part of the presentation of the Treaty of Versailles was Woodrow Wilson and his ideas of the 14 points. And this was one of his major endeavors as president. He brought us into World War I and believed that as a result of our leadership, which ultimately helped our side win the war, he could push forward these 14 points to kind of set the stage for how diplomacy should work from here on out. So he had a speech, and in the speech he outlined 14 points that would be the ground rules for peace. So he gave this speech to Congress, and it would eventually travel to Europe and give this speech and try and secure approval and support for it. And at this time in Europe, Woodrow Wilson, our president, was seen as a hero because we kind of swooped in midway through the war and really kind of secured the win for our side. Unfortunately, when he came up with this idea and first presented it, the idea behind it was that he wanted to present this to both sides and say that we should have a peace without victory. And if you think about it, the way that leaders of countries who are at war think, I mean, I know none of us have been in those shoes, but a peace without victory, really? So what have we put all this time in for? What have we put all these soldiers in for? What have all these people died for? Why have all these resources gone there? So it was received rather mildly by Congress and by people across the world, to be honest. But at any rate, he presented these 14 points, and the first 5 points showed the causes of the war. So he went through and kind of listed the things that we should have to keep us from going to war again. And this consisted of open treaties. So we should have not closed-door trading policies. This kind of goes back to the open-door policy in China. And countries shouldn't be restricted from trading with each other. The second one, the freedom of the seas. People should be able to travel back and forth across the ocean with goods to import and export without having to worry about impressment and taking over of ships by other countries and losing your goods and your soldiers as a result of travel across the seas. He wanted to abolish tariffs because high tariffs got us involved with securing kind of less than kosher trading deals. So this would encourage trade among countries if there weren't as high of tariffs on imports and exports. He wanted an arms reduction. We had all just, remember, mobilized our arms and mobilized our troops in the main causes of World War I, militarism. And he wanted worldwide people to reduce the amount of arms that they had because that would encourage peace. And then lastly, in the first of the 5 points, he wanted people to consider the interests of the colonial people. So when you're talking about making a new country, you have to say, well, what do the people who live there want to do? The borders of Europe fluctuated during World War I, and, we have the Bosnians and the Serbians and the Germans and the Austrians and the Hungarians and all these different people, and he really thought it was important to go to the people who inhabited the land and say, hey, Serbians, do you want to be part of Bosnia, or what do you want to do here? So that was kind of seen by a lot of people as kind of weak, but he believed that it was the right thing to do. Points number 6 through 13 dealt with boundary changes, and again, it was based on self-determination. So the same thing as point 5, when you're considering the colonial people that were there. Whoever lives in this area, if they're all, Italian, that's going to be Italy. And whoever lives in this area, if they're all Serbian, it's going to be Serbia. So he wanted to propose these boundary changes based on these ideas. And then number 14, the 14th point of his 14 points, was the establishment of a League of Nations, which would be the precursor to the modern-day UN. And the only point that kind of stuck with Congress was the League of Nations, and then ultimately we ended up not voting for it. So out of a global community, we avoided the League of Nations, which I think was kind of a slap in the face to Wilson. And to try and secure support for this, he traveled across the country and had a very, very demanding schedule. And ultimately, I think that his defense of the 14 points killed him because he was becoming more and more frail, and he ended up dying shortly thereafter. So I think he had too high stress of a schedule and wanted to promote this 14 points and his ideas with Congress and try to get the word out that this is how we're going to secure peace in the future. And as a result of this, he kind of drove himself to his deathbed. At the actual Treaty of Versailles, we had the USA, Great Britain, Italy, and France. So we've got a picture there from the left there, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando of Italy, Clemenceau of France, and Woodrow Wilson on the far right of the United States. So these were the four countries that got together and kind of designed the Treaty of Versailles. Now, when you're looking at this picture and thinking about World War I, there's one major player from our team that's missing. Who is it? Yes, you're exactly right. It's Russia. Okay, so Russia was not invited, and so we will see repercussions as a result of that shortly thereafter. And again, of the 14 points, only the League of Nations passed among people at this treaty, and we, as the United States of America, did not support the author of the League of Nations and didn't ultimately join. So that was a political slap in the face for Wilson, and ultimately, like I said, led to his death. In terms of what was said at the Treaty of Versailles, they wanted to punish Germany because Germany was the loser and the winners write the treaties. So what they were going to do is charge reparations to Germany. You know, Germany, this is your fault, and we want you to pay for it, literally. So you're going to have to pay out monetary funds to, the countries in which you inflicted terror. We told the Germans that they were not allowed an air force, that they were to reduce the size of their navy, and their army was to have no more than 100,000 people in it. So you still could defend yourself, but you'd be much weaker than before. And you also had to take the land that you had taken from France and give it back to them. So there were portions of the Alsace-Lorraine region and different parts of France that were taken by the Germans that needed to be returned to France. And last and probably most detrimental to the cause of world peace was something called a war guilt clause. And basically, the leaders of the Treaty of Versailles got together and said, hey, Germany, you have to write this letter that says, Dear world, yes, you're right, World War I was all our fault. Sorry about that. Love, Germany. And the Germans didn't want to do that. It's humiliating. You know, the war wasn't entirely their fault. It was a world war. And so this really set the stage for negativity that would spiral into World War II. So out of the Treaty of Versailles, these punishments came to Germany. We had the establishment of the League of Nations, which the United States voted down. And we had kind of a grouping together of the Big Four minus Russia, which also would increase tension between the United States and Russia and these other countries in Russia in the long run. So after the war and after the Treaty of Versailles, we had humiliated Germany. And so this is it kind of set the stage for the perfect storm of Hitler's rise. They were devastated. Their land was devastated. They were humiliated. They had to reduce all of their military. They needed a strong leader to kind of step forward. And the Kaiser was, kind of done after World War I. And this is where Hitler kind of really surged forward in popularity because of all of these conditions that the war brought. The Bolsheviks, the Russians, felt ignored. They were upset because they were in the war until 1917. They were in it way longer than we were. And so they were upset that nothing was given to them. They pulled out to deal with their own civil war situation. You can respect that, but they were not given anything in terms of reparations or land or anything as a result of their 3 years of being in the war. We sail in 1917 and the war ends in 1918. So we kind of took charge and then decided that, you know what, we're not going to include the Russians in these talks. And last and potentially most interesting, this could be one of my top moments in history. at the Treaty of Versailles, there was a situation where other colonized countries were coming forward saying, hey, we want your help. We want you to lead us and help us fight for our independence. And as the Big Four were meeting at the Treaty of Versailles, there was a knock on the door. And this little Asian man came in and said, hello, I am here from my country of Vietnam. My name is Ho Chi Minh, and I'm wondering if you could help us get the French out of our country and help us secure our independence. That's what we would like out of this meeting that you're having right now. Does the name Ho Chi Minh ring any bells with anybody out there listening? Ho Chi Minh, he was the leader of Vietnam. And, among the great what ifs in history, what if we would have listened to Ho Chi Minh and supported him in securing his country's independence? What if we would have supported, different causes to try and secure their financial situation over in Vietnam? What if? Could we have potentially avoided the Vietnam War? We'll never know. But I do know that we didn't pay attention to Ho Chi Minh when he approached the Big Four at the Treaty of Versailles. And as a result, we ended up dealing with him quite intensely later in the 1970s. So one of those small historical connections that really is kind of mind-boggling when you think of it as a large narrative in our country's history. So that is the end of our recording.